My name is Lucas, and I wish we had never gone back into that forest. After Logan disappeared, after the ritual site left its mark on us, we tried to pretend life was normal, but we knew better. Ryan, Daniel, Mark, and Iwi were cursed. The symbols carved into our skin weren't just scars, they were warnings. And then the dreams started. Every night, I saw the same thing. A circle of figures in the woods, chanting, their hands raised toward the sky. The moon bled red, and in the center of the circle, something pulsed beneath the ground, something alive. And then I would wake up with the taste of dirt in my mouth. We agreed to never go back, but we had no choice. One by one, we woke up standing at the edge of the clearing, unaware of how we had gotten there. The stones had returned, forming a perfect ring, their surfaces slick with something dark. The torches were lit, casting long shadows that danced like living things. The symbols on our arms burned, pulsing in sync with the glow of the sigil carved into the ground. And then the chanting began. It wasn't coming from the trees, it was coming from us. I clamped my hands over my mouth, but the words still spilled out in a language I didn't understand. My legs moved against my will, stepping forward toward the sigil, toward the center where the ground had begun to crack. Something was waking up beneath us. Ryan grabbed my arm, his eyes wild. We have to break the circle. Mark wasn't moving. He was staring at the ground, his lips parted in silent awe. The cracks widened beneath him, and a thick black hand too long, too many fingers reached up and wrapped around his ankle. He didn't scream. He just looked at us, eyes full of something between terror and acceptance. Then he was gone. Daniel lunged toward the sigil, his hands tearing at the lines in the dirt, smearing them, breaking the pattern. The chanting stuttered, the firelight dimming. The air around us shook. The forest itself screamed, the ground beneath. The sigil caved inward, a pit of writhing shadows devouring the stone circle. The torches flickered and died, and in that silence, a whisper slithered through the air. Not yet. Then we were standing at the edge of the woods again. The clearing was gone. The sigil, the torches, the pit gone, as if it had never been there. Except for the missing space where Mark had stood. Ryan turned to me, his breath shaking. Did we stop it? Daniel didn't answer. He was staring at his arm, at the symbol that should have been there. It was gone, and in its place was something new, something worse. My name is Daniel, and I am not who I used to be. After what happened in the clearing, I wasn't the same. I could feel something inside me, something watching, something waiting. Ryan never spoke about it, but I saw the fear in his eyes whenever he looked at me. He knew, just as I did, that I didn't walk out of those woods alone. We tried to go back to our lives, but the symbols never faded. Not from our skin, not from our minds. The whispers followed us, lingering just beneath reality. I'd wake up in places I didn't remember going to. My dreams were not my own. And then, the others started disappearing. Mark was gone, swallowed by the earth itself. Jason had been taken long before that. Now, it was just me and Ryan. We should have run. We should have left town, burned those cursed woods to the ground. But it wouldn't have mattered. They had already chosen us. The night it happened, I woke up standing in the middle of my living room, my feet bare, my clothes damp with morning dew. The front door was wide open. I heard Ryan's voice calling my name, distant and desperate, but I wasn't afraid. I walked outside, and the world felt wrong. The air was thick, like stepping into another reality. The trees loomed taller, darker, their branches stretching toward me like grasping fingers. The moon hung too low in the sky, its light tinged red, and Ryan was waiting at the edge of my yard. His eyes were wide, his breath ragged. "Daniel," he gasped, "we have to go. Now." I shook my head. I didn't know why, but I couldn't move. I couldn't leave. The weight of something unseen held me there. like invisible chains wrapped around my limbs. Then the shadows came. They slid from the trees, forming impossibly tall figures with hollow faces. The earth trembled as they moved. The whispers swelled into a deafening chorus. My skin burned where the symbol had been carved into me, the pain sharp and electric. Ryan grabbed my arm and yanked me forward. "We can still fight it," he said. But I knew he was wrong. It was too late. A cold hand closed around my wrist. Not Ryan's. Something else. Something stronger. I gasped as my vision blurred, the world tilting. My body was no longer my own. The shadows pressed closer, their mouths yawning open, endless voids of nothingness. Ryan screamed my name. He tried to pull me away, but I didn't move. I smiled. The last thing I saw was his face, twisted in horror as the darkness swallowed me. Hold on. And then I woke up back in my bed. The house was silent, the air still, but I knew this wasn't my home anymore. My reflection in the mirror watched me with black eyes. My lips moved, but the voice that came out wasn't mine. The ritual is complete. My name is Ryan, and I should have never returned to those woods. It had been a week since we lost Jason and Logan, since the symbols had burned themselves into our skin, since we had barely escaped the horrors of the ritual site. But the nightmares never stopped. They weren't dreams, they were warnings. They showed me a path deeper into the woods, where the real ritual had yet to begin. And I was being called. Mark and Daniel refused to speak about it, but I could see it in their eyes. We all knew something had changed. We were no longer just bystanders. We were part of it now. One by one, we found ourselves drawn back to the forest. We didn't plan to go. We just woke up there, standing in the same clearing where everything began. And this time, we weren't alone. Figures moved through the trees, their shapes flickering like shadows cast by a dying fire. The symbols on our bodies burned, glowing through our shirts. A circle of stones had formed around us, sealing us in. The air was thick, heavy, humming with an unseen force. Then, Jason stepped forward from the darkness. He looked the same, but he wasn't. His eyes were empty, his face slack, as if something had hollowed him out and left his body behind. The moment he spoke, my blood turned to ice. "You were chosen." His voice was layered, distorted, as if 100 voices spoke through him at once. He lifted a hand, and the ground beneath us shuddered. The shadows solidified, stepping closer, their faces featureless voids. Mark screamed and bolted. He never made it past the stones. The moment he touched the edge of the circle, the ground opened beneath him. Black tendrils, writhing and pulsing, shot out and wrapped around his legs, dragging him down. His screams were cut short as the earth swallowed him whole. Daniel and I stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to move. Jason, or whatever he had become, tilted his head, watching us like a predator sizing up its prey. The ritual must be completed. I wanted to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there, but my body no longer belonged to me. My limbs locked, my breath shallow. The shadows pressed closer, their mouths opening into endless, gaping maws. Then, Daniel moved. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He simply stepped forward, past the stones, straight toward Jason. The shadows hesitated, as if confused. "Take me," Daniel said. His voice was steady, empty. Jason smiled. The ground beneath him pulsed, the symbols glowing brighter. The figures stepped back, as if retreating from something unseen. Then, the air shifted, and Daniel fell to his knees. His body convulsed, the symbols on his skin burning white-hot, before vanishing entirely. Then, silence. Jason was gone. The shadows faded. The stones crumbled to dust. The clearing was empty. Only Daniel remained. When I reached him, his eyes were shut, his breath slow and shallow. But as I touched his shoulder, his eyes snapped open. They were black, and he smiled. My name is Daniel, and I should have never gone back. It had been 2 weeks since we stumbled upon the ritual in the woods. Since we ran for our lives and tried to forget what we saw, but Logan had changed. He barely spoke, he barely ate, and every night he woke up screaming, clutching his chest where the symbol had been carved into his skin. Then he disappeared. No note, no signs of struggle, just gone. I knew where he had gone. Deep down, I knew so. Against every instinct, I gathered the others, Mark, Ryan, and Jason, and we returned to the woods. The moment we stepped past the tree line, the air felt different. The forest, once filled with the usual hum of nature, was dead silent. Not a single bird, not a single rustling leaf. And then we saw them, the symbols, carved into the trees, glowing faintly in the dark. They hadn't been there before. They led us forward, deeper and deeper into the forest, until we reached the clearing again. It was empty now. No robed figures, no torches, no altar, just Logan. He stood in the center of the clearing, his back to us. His shirt was gone, and his skin. It wasn't right. The carved symbol had spread, branching out across his chest, like veins of fire, pulsing with a sickly glow. His head tilted slightly at the sound of our footsteps. Then he turned. His eyes were black, hollow. He smiled, but it wasn't his smile. It was something else, something wearing his face. We shouldn't be here, Mark whispered, but I couldn't move. Logan took a step forward, and the ground beneath us trembled. The trees around us groaned as shadows stretched unnaturally long. A whisper crawled through the air, growing louder, more urgent. Run. I grabbed Ryan's arm, but he was frozen. Jason took a step back, his breath coming in short gasps. Mark was already turning when Logan, or whatever he had become, lifted his hand. The forest screamed. Wind howled as the ground cracked. The symbols in the trees flared bright, and figures emerged from the shadow stall. Featureless beings with elongated limbs and empty, yawning mouths. They moved toward us with impossible speed. I ran. Branches whipped against my face. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I could hear the others behind me, their frantic footsteps crashing through the underbrush. But something was wrong. The forest wasn't letting us leave. The trees shifted, the paths twisted. No matter which way we turned, we ended up back at the clearing. Back to Logan. He was waiting, smiling, his arms open wide, like a preacher welcoming his congregation. Jason screamed. The shadows surged, and then, nothing. I woke up outside the woods, my body covered in dirt and scratches. Ryan and Mark lay beside me, unconscious but breathing. Jason was gone. Logan was gone. The only thing left was the whispering wind and the symbol, now burned into my own skin. They let us go, for now. My name is Stefan, and I never should have gone into those woods. It started as a weekend camping trip, just me and 4 friends, looking to escape the city and enjoy nature. The forest stretched for miles, untouched and silent, the kind of place that felt disconnected from reality. We set up camp near a clearing, built a fire, and let the night swallow us in its quiet embrace. That's when we heard the chanting, faint at first, carried on the wind, a rhythmic, low murmur that sent chills down my spine. We exchanged uneasy glances. Logan, the skeptic of the group, chuckled. Probably some weirdos messing around, he said. But the sound didn't stop. If anything, it grew clearer, more deliberate. Curiosity got the best of us. We grabbed our flashlights and followed the sound, weaving through the trees. The further we walked, the colder it became, the air thickening like something unseen was pressing against us. Then, the trees thinned, revealing a clearing bathed in moonlight, and we saw them. A circle of people in dark robes stood around a stone altar. their faces obscured by hoods. Symbols were carved into the dirt around them, shifting under the flickering torchlight. But what made my stomach turn was what lay on the altar, a deer, or what was left of one. Its body was mutilated, its flesh carved with the same symbols that surrounded the robed figures. The chanting stopped. Silence crashed over the clearing as every hooded head turned toward us in unison. Then they moved, not ran, not walked. They glided silent, swift, unnatural, straight toward us. Logan cursed and bolted. The rest of us followed, tearing through the underbrush, branches slashing at our skin. The sound of footsteps, no, something worse, something in you. Closer. I dared to glance back. They weren't running, but they were keeping up. Their faces still hidden, their bodies untouched by the branches we crashed through. The symbols carved into the deer seemed to glow, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then, the whispers started. Not from them, from the forest itself. The trees, the wind, the ground beneath, it all whispered. Words I didn't understand, but felt deep in my bones. I tripped. The whispers turned to screams as the figures closed in. Their hoods fell back, revealing faces that weren't human. Stretched, hollow, their eyes black pits that seemed to swallow. The light, a hand wrapped around my ankle. I kicked, scrambling back. The moment I broke free, the whispers stopped. The figures halted, their heads tilting in eerie unison. Then, as if we had never been there, they turned and melted into the darkness. We didn't stop running until we reached camp. We packed in silence, our hands shaking, our minds refusing to process what we had seen. The forest around us was quiet, too quiet, as if it had been watching, waiting. As we drove away, Logan finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. They let us go. I turned to him, my stomach knotting. What do you mean? He didn't answer. He just lifted his shirt, carved into his skin, as if by invisible hands, was the same symbol we had seen in the clearing, and it was still bleeding.